Welcome to our Galactic Alchemy podcast.
Whether we're exploring intuition, healing, or higher guidance, you are invited to tune in, not just with your ears, but with your heart and your energy.
I'm Anita, and I work with soul-aligned leaders, visionaries, and healers to restore energetic coherence, awaken truth, and reconnect to the intelligence of the heart.
I'm Azriena, and I do very similar work to Anita through a different modality. I also work with integrating your multidimensional selves in a process I call soul alchemy.
This podcast is a space for deep connection, for attuned conversations that clear distortion, awaken soul gifts, and return us to the frequency of who we really are.
So let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Galactic Alchemy. I'm Azriena.
And I'm Anita.
And across the spiral of time, across the layers of forgetting and remembering, we gather again in the living field of the Galactic Alchemy podcast. So this podcast exists because the conversation was already happening between Anita and I, and we felt the call to open it up so more of you could step inside and be part of this conversation. So today, we are exploring something that feels perhaps both tender and powerful. We're going to talk about unlearning smallness, what the alchemy of expansion actually feels like in the body, and the truth that we are trying to rewire. You don't have to shrink to belong. It is about the energy of smallness, about learning that it is safe to take up space, that it is safe for us to be seen, because perhaps for many of us that hasn't felt true. Maybe it's safer to dim our brilliance so that we can belong and so that we don't feel rejected and we can secure connection. So on that note, maybe Anita, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Azriena. I think it's a really powerful subject because so often we're taught to fit in, mold ourselves to a situation, and there's so many times where I speak to women about stepping into their power, and they're talking about, living their truth and wanting to really pursue their passions. And one of the stumbling blocks is giving yourself permission to do that. And the reason that they struggle to give permission to themselves is it's been really safe for them to stay small. Because if I stay small, I'm not attracting too much attention, I'm not upsetting anyone, I'm not disturbing the status quo. A lot of people are brought up with the finger pointing, who do you think you are? Every time they try to step out of their limited circle and express themselves on a bigger playing field or in a bigger space, someone in the room points the finger and says, who do you think you are? And that embarrassment and humiliation and shame that you may have as a child or as a teenager or someone who's just starting work, it becomes debilitating to step out of that really safe space and say, actually, I have this thought about it and I'd like to pursue it, and I would like to, take the team in another direction. And people don't often want change. So what they want you to do is conform. And I think what's wonderful about this younger generation coming through is they're really rejecting these old systems, and they're saying that their voice matters and they want to step forward and declare who they are. But there are women out there who feel that the minute they step out of their comfort zone, they feel unsafe. They feel that they're priming themselves as a target for attack. The idea that for people to be able to step out and be who they truly are, they're going to be different. They're going to be unique, because that is the inherent promise of being on this planet. You're not the same as the person sitting next to you. Your thoughts might be similar and your moral code might be similar, but that doesn't mean that you're the same as that person. And at some point, your value system starts to take you in a direction where you're forming this identity of self that really is unique to you. And at some point, you will get to a junction where you have to decide, do I agree with the status quo, or do I just continue on the path that feels most aligned for me? What do you think, Az?
Firstly, when you were describing how, each of us brings something different to the table, we offer what's unique to our gifts and our abilities. Visually, I had the images of flowers, like how a rose doesn't pretend to be a hibiscus, a lily doesn't pretend it's a lotus, and there's no need to be anything that you are not. But every single flower is beautiful, and everyone have their favorite flowers. Some prefer this than the other. Some prefer blue roses and not white roses. There's no need for this flower to feel like it should shrink. At least that was the image that crossed my mind.
That's a really beautiful image, actually. It's so pretty.
Like, imagine if we had been allowed from birth to just be free and not develop a certain sense of shame around who we really are, unbridled in the healthiest ways. And we could just step into any room and not feel the need to shrink. The other thing that crossed my mind when you were saying again about how this sense of being small and not wanting to step up and being seen, not saying that that's important for everyone, but it's more about how we show up in the spaces that we do, whether it's in bigger spaces or smaller spaces, professional or personal. It is wonderful to step into those situations with a nervous system that's relaxed, accepting, and not feeling that we are reaching for a certain level of perfection that feels massive and is just giving us lots of anxiety.
I think you've tapped into something really important. You really address the core of what I was hoping we would speak about today, which is sometimes when we play small and then we think it's safe, at some point, honestly, it's not fulfilling. We're bored, we're frustrated, we're irritated. And then everything that everyone else does becomes really irritating for us. And we don't know why we're so, unhappy. And we keep saying, no, we're fine. But the truth is, we're just becoming quietly irritated by everything in our environment. And that smallness just becomes overwhelming for our nervous system because our energy wants to grow, our energy wants to expand, and we want to step into, our spirit wants to step into the fullness of who it is. So I was listening to a CEO recently, a woman in the US, and she said that as a CEO, she would walk into rooms and feel tremendous pressure to prove that she was intelligent enough and academic enough and wise enough to be in the room. And she said that was a pressure she put on herself. She said, I felt it from the collective that I needed to keep proving that I was enough for this room. And my takeaway from her conversation was that being in the room is enough. Just start with being in the room. And then you just mentioned your nervous system. Be in the room and then find your breath and just slow everything down until you're breathing easily in the room. The people in these rooms tend to have impeccable gut instincts, and that can sometimes translate as predatorial energy. You feel like you're in a room with really powerful people, and it can actually disturb or destabilize your nervous system because that fight or flight energy is heightened because now you're tapping into the mammalian brain, you're out in the jungle, it's, kill or be killed. And what I find is recognize that you're in the room because you deserve to be in the room. Slow your breath down, and you can start to process things as rationally as possible. And then really come into your power and recognize that when you have a strong sense of self-identity, you don't need to identify with anyone else's projections of who you are in that moment. And in doing that, you reclaim your own power. So I have a little exercise that I do whenever I'm in a room that's new or where I feel a little uncomfortable, particularly with people who are CEOs, people who are at the top of their game, people with great instincts. And I will just send an infinity symbol of golden liquid light between myself, my heart, and their heart. And the mantra in my head is, you're not a threat to me, and I'm not a threat to you. And you're not a threat to me, and I'm not a threat to you. And then one more time, You're not a threat to me, and I'm not a threat to you. In doing that, I'm energetically sending a message that we're safe to be here together, that we can coexist. And I am always amazed at how well that works, because it's almost like the energy of that person's Taurus field is picking up on the energy from my Taurus field. And I often find that the person either does a very big exhale or they soften somehow. And I think energetically, my message to them is we can put our weapons down. It's safe to be in the room together. And the best part of it is when people put their weapons down, now we can be collaborative. Now we can talk about the things that don't work without feeling judged. We can lean into vulnerability, and we can develop something. We can come up with solutions, and we can co-create. We need to be able to coexist in a really safe way so that we can tap into inspiration and new ideas and creativity. So I would invite people to think about their self-identity. Think about how you're describing yourself in those quiet moments. Because when you become very clear about who you are, then you can show up in these spaces and be unique and add value and feel not just seen but heard. And I think that's so important for the human psyche, to be able to be in a space where they feel that they don't have to reshape or remold themselves. They can really just be themselves.
So I think at this point, I would love to reiterate that we're not forcing expansion. Because being big doesn't always have to mean that you're dominating a room or you're being obnoxious about it. It doesn't mean you have to be louder than anyone else, right? Perhaps it's about inhabiting our full energetic field, but with integrity and sincerity. And it's not making a jump that feels so unnatural that it seeds more fear than a sense of curiosity about exploring where is our edge and maybe how far can I take this in a way that could benefit myself and my loved ones. So, we are not forcing expansion, but perhaps we are talking about alchemizing the fear we have around it. Because what if, the bigness is not the ego? What if we are aligning ourselves to our inherent gifts? By us not wanting to be seen, by us wanting to seek safety in the feeling of being small, we are also not doing our service to those who could benefit from what we are bringing to the table. And on that topic, you mentioned this tool, which I thought could be very useful for our listeners to explore. So firstly, you mentioned earlier about the infinity symbol, and I can imagine myself being able to observe how it impacts the room. And the other one you mentioned is around self-identity.
That's beautifully said. We talked about this earlier, the idea of feeling safe to take up space. And that really landed for me, because I think we've all listened to enough self-help podcasts and messaging around, what it was like as children, and, you'll be seen and not heard, and be well behaved and have impeccable manners and all these things. And not everyone plays by the same rules. So then you go out into the world, and a lot of the things that you were taught that were possibly, lovely and convenient for your parents, don't serve you out in the real world. And the idea that when you're out there, a lot of people didn't have some of the safety nets that we had as children. So being able to take up space and feel safe is a really big one. If you felt that you were ever compromised or told that you need to be quiet, or you need to toe the line, or you need to conform. I think conformity often is this collective consciousness that we have to just fall into line, be like everyone else, show up, don't stand out. And there's enough self-help podcasts around telling us, just be yourself, be yourself. What I wanted us to really lean into today was, how do you really do that? Like, how do you go beyond the words and the sentence? How do you actually embody and embrace being yourself and being comfortable with taking up space? And that's when I thought, when you take the time to journal and maybe write a paragraph or two about your self-identity. This is, who are you? Who are you? What's important to you? What are your value systems? What are your morals? What are you uncompromising about? What amuses you? What makes you laugh? What brings joy into your life? What do you notice about the people that you're attracting into your life? What do they have in common? What do you notice about the people who trigger you and upset you? What do they have in common? Because once you start to create this really beautiful, clean self-identity, and you commit that to your spirit, now when you show up in spaces that don't feel safe or don't feel quite right, you can stand in the moment. Giving yourself permission to be in the room is the first step. And then beyond that, breathe, calibrate, find your breath in the room, and now look around the room. And if anyone says anything that isn't aligned with your self-identity, you don't need to own it. So no one can ever redefine who you are. And I think that's where sometimes being small feels safe, because we often feel pressured by people to keep redefining who we are in the room in order to stay in the room. But you don't. You stay in the room if you choose to stay in the room. And if these people aren't your tribe, or they're not your people, then you leave the room and there's no regrets or remorse. You had the experience, not for you, next. But if you choose to stay in the room, really knowing that your self-identity is yours to write, not someone else's. No one has permission to edit your self-identity. So when people make projections or comments or anything that makes you feel like you have to overperform or underperform in order to stay in the room, compose yourself and recognize that that's their narrative. It's not yours. You don't have to be anyone in order to fit in. And now you naturally take up a little more space in that room because your energetic field relaxes. And the truth is, the people who feel comfortable and safe around you start to move towards you. And when they come in, it's your energetic field. That sense of calmness within you makes their Taurus field feel comfortable and calm. Now they can feel safe. Now they can open up. Now they can share something a little more private or vulnerable or creative. It is always the story of the person that is the most comfortable with themselves in the room. They're comfortable taking up space. And then they invite everyone else to do the same. And they're the people that are attracting all of the warmth and the attention and the conversation. They're the people that we go and stand next to and we get a little closer, and you don't know why, but you know that you want to be in that space with that person. There's something really inviting about it. It's non-combative. And that doesn't mean you can't have opposing points of views, but there's no kill or be killed instinct. It is completely collaborative.
A personal anecdote actually crossed my mind. I have been in corporate surroundings where, there are certain expectations of what people would share and how you think you're meant to come across. But I know I'm not of that mold. So I'm like, this is it. Like, let me show my crazy. I have led a couple of talks and dropped in esoteric angle concepts, and I just left it there. Because the like-minded ones, they are somewhere out here too, and they will start crawling out of the woodwork, and they did. So imagine in a sea of 500, and then you get 5 who came out and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe you just brought up a topic of that nature in this space. And I'm like, yeah, well, I tried. What's there to lose? At the most, people think, oh, she is really a bit nuts. But I can live with that. But it also took years of life experience to get me to a place where I am okay to be perceived as someone who's slightly weird or a little bit out of the norm.
I have this beautiful woman. She's young and she's an entrepreneur. She has multiple businesses, and she came in the door and she wanted to talk about spirituality and Akashic records. At some point she looked at me and she said, everybody's weird. Like, everybody is. even the people who think they're not. She said everybody has things that they're just fascinated by. They have their guilty pleasures and their TV shows or their food or whatever it is that they are obsessed with. And she said, I think it's being so comfortable with whatever your shade of weird is that you show up even more authentically, and it just gives everyone permission to not have to be so perfect all the time.
Exactly, because what is this idea and concept of perfection anyway? Personally, I adore different quirks in different people. Be your best weird self. So, Anita, I think as our podcast is Galactic Alchemy, we are also exploring the concept that shrinking is not a personality trait or a humble choice. But what if it is also an alchemical distortion, a deliberate reduction of our original frequency and perhaps spatial presence? So what if the true alchemical process is one of restoration and expansion, returning our consciousness, light body, and even our nervous system to its native magnitude?
That could be one of the most beautiful descriptions of energy from that higher perspective. That is just beautifully said, Azriena. So when we did our podcast last week, you dove into Lemurian waters. And when you did that, I spent the last week just thinking about Lemuria. I did a trip to Mount Shasta in 2015. Well, I'd heard very little about Lemuria prior to that. And I got there, and it was interesting because the locals understand all of the mythology around Lemuria and this, original civilization, and how Mount Shasta in California embodies this energy of Lemuria. Lemurian energy is said to embody the energy of the Pacific Rim, which is, the Hawaiian, the Polynesian, the Maori, the Japanese, the Asian countries. They all carry this energy of Lemuria according to, old folklore and stories. So I sat with the energy of Lemuria, and I came across this beautiful meditation that Kelly Kolodny does. So I did the meditation, and it took me on this journey into Lemurian energy and into Lemurian waters. And there was dolphin energy, and it just really started to touch my heart. And I had this really big expansion and awareness of the power of Lemurian energy. And then it took us to a place where we got to explore what that meant for our hearts. And in my heart, I saw another infinity symbol. And then the infinity symbol seemed to expand outwards. And now it was a figure 8. And in one portion of it, I saw this image, and this is something that Azriena knows about me. So I'm very visual, and I'll see images and hear things all the time. And I saw this very biblical, cinematic experience of being a woman, being stoned back in the day. So when we're talking about not being seen, there's something in my vibration and in my frequency that being seen is a death sentence for me. It's a really big deal. And I say that out loud, and I have this wave of nervousness that washes over me as I say it. And that was in one part of the infinity symbol. And then in the other part, I saw these men standing around in a circle, and they were the men who'd been stoning this woman. And that's clearly, an aspect of who I am. And I then see the men standing around, and all of a sudden they're wearing these white robes. And I see them that they're actually really wise men. It's almost like whatever happened in that biblical age, since then, these men have come into the wisdom of who they are. And now they want to teach us and inform us and be guides for us. So from if you call it a galactic or an ascended master perspective, it seems that these men who once walked the earth and who had all these opinions and who were responsible for these things that happened had come into their wisdom, and now they wanted to really watch over us and guide us and help us. work with the collective consciousness to come into alignment with who we are and to reclaim who we are. So when we step into our power and we say, whatever happened in that past life is done and it's finished. And the energy of that has been alchemized through pure love, through intention. And now we're stepping into a time where it is really safe to be me. It is safe to step forward, and it's safe to feel like I'm taking up a little more room, and it's safe to be whole. And in doing that, I went around the circle of men, and there was one man who was crying. And he was like bent over and he's crying. And I went over to him, and this is energetically, I'm still in the meditation. And I said, it's okay. And he said, I'm so sorry. And I said, it's okay. And he said, I'd like to be a teacher. And then he stood up and he came into his power. So when we hold compassion for people who've done things that may have been unspeakable back in a past life, but when we hold space for compassion and for them to show up and to transmute that lower energy and step into a higher frequency, everyone in that circle gets stronger. All of the people there get stronger. And when I say there were men in that circle, of course there could have been women back in those biblical times who were also starting, but it appeared in my circle, in my meditation, that it was predominantly men. Anyway, I moved around the circle. There was one more man, and he was looking at me, and he said, I hold the energy of judgment. I judge people. And I looked at him and I said, like, I understand everyone is entitled to have their own opinions. You don't have to be like everyone else. And then it was almost like he squinted, and then he blinked. And then, in not being judged for being himself, it was like he just transmuted that judgment energy, and it was released from his soul. And what I saw then was him smile and say, I'd like to be a teacher. I'd like to show up and teach. And that kind of rounded out that second circle. And when I looked back to the first circle, like that first part of the infinity symbol, I just saw a man sweeping the ground. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm making a clean slate. You can now plant whatever you want in this part of your experience. You can. And I immediately thought, oh, I want to put a garden, I'll put a house. And then I paused and took a breath and thought, don't fill in the grid. Don't fill it in so quickly. Let that part of this story be empty for a little bit. Get to know who you are. Really claim your self-identity. Let that other part of this story now organically develop. And I thought there will be so much beauty and grace in allowing this other part of my story to just fill itself in. I don't have to rush to judgment. I don't have to rush to decorate it. I can let my story evolve. And the truth is, that's what we came to do. So we might have come into the first part of, our life, and we've got these bloodlines, and we want to clean up the bloodline, and we want to look at whatever our wounds are and the triggers that are at vibration within our lineage. And we're cleaning and clearing and releasing envy or jealousy or pain or hurt or persecution. And then at some point, we transmute that wounding into wisdom, and then we give ourselves the space to fill in that new space, to fill in the grid. Really let your self-identity flow into your life, flow into your cellular body, take up space in your own field, and really come into the fullness of knowing who you are. And now you don't need all the answers, because everything that's going to come towards you is going to feel aligned and destined and synchronistic and delicious.
You have shared in the first half of our podcast today some very grounded tools, especially around exploring one's self-identity. So when you were sharing this download you got from your meditation, I feel that one of the tools that I would like to share with our listeners today is the power of the violet flame. So this is from the more esoteric angle, and because you keep mentioning transmutation and the violet flame, this ultraviolet light is one of the most powerful color stream, light stream we can work with at this time of Earth ascension to help us through this. Maybe the more grounded methodology, listeners can imagine this violet flame enveloping them in their morning meditations before they step out of the house. Again, play with it and see how you would like to work with it.
Yes, it's beautiful. I think it's lovely to give people tools that they can take away and then they can implement. I use the violet flame protocol as well when I'm going out. If I'm going out and it's going to be busy or noisy, in order to just keep my energy aligned, I will surround myself in a bubble of white light. I set the intention to violet flame, which is just like a purple flame surrounding that white light. And I know that the violet flame has such a high frequency that it will dissolve and remove all negative and lower energy so that it can't impact my personal space. It can't impact my energy. And it feels like it's a way to show up in integrity when I'm out in public. So your energy is yours, mine is mine. I'm super sensitive to energy. So I've really learned to, and I invite people to call in whoever they feel safe with. So whether it's Saint Germain or Archangel Michael or, Jesus or Babaji or Buddha or whoever they believe in, or the universe, just call the universe in and say, please sweep through my body and remove any energy that doesn't belong to me. And I've got to the point now where it's like, snapping my fingers and I feel the energy move through. And it's incredible that after saying that, remove anything that doesn't belong to me or any energy that's not mine, all of that anxiety immediately disappears. And it took me a while to recognize that I'm not having an anxiety attack. I don't have anxiety about being in these rooms, but I'm so sensitive to energy that I'm feeling everybody else's anxiety and I'm misinterpreting it as my own. And I think I did that probably for the first, 30 years of my life. And it's not until I had these protocols where I could be really clear about what is mine and what belongs to someone else.
And the other tool that came to my mind is a physical exercise. I usually do this at the start of my one-on-one sessions with my female clients. So I get them to spread their arms wide, and stretch it so they feel like they are stretching from one end of the room to the other, like a giant starfish. Reach out to the very edge of the rooms, hands, legs, everything. Just breathe into it, make yourself feel big. And then we tell ourselves as we breathe in and out, it is safe for me to take up space. I give myself permission to take up space.
Fantastic.
So I feel like we've went today, Anita, we talked about unlearning smallness and what the alchemy of expansion can actually feel like in the body. And perhaps what we can look to rewire together is that we do not have to shrink to belong. And if we can recap some of the tools that we've shared before, Anita, how would you recap yours?
I would invite you to write in your journal just a couple of paragraphs about your self-identity, being really clear about who you are. I would invite you to try the practice of running the infinity symbol of golden liquid light between yourself and another person, from heart to heart. Could be from throat chakra to throat chakra. It could be from solar plexus to solar plexus, and just sending that energy back and forward and practicing, I'm not a threat to you. You're not a threat to me. Such a beautiful softening protocol.
On that note, Anita, I think it's also important for us to let our listeners know how can they learn more about you and what it is that you do. How would you lead them to your work?
Thank you, Az. So I have a website, anitabeacroft.com, and I would invite you to have a look at the work that I'm doing. I specialize in Akashic Records. I have a passion for Jinshin Jitsu, which is a Japanese healing tool. I also offer sessions that provide body scans, which is where we have a look at where energy is sitting in the body, where it's dense, where it's ready to be released. And using that together with the Akashic tools that I have, we clear energy out of the body and we recalibrate it and bring it back into balance and harmony.
And I have had a session with Anita. It was one of the most delicious 3 hours of my life. It is really transformative. That is what I will leave as a teaser. And for me, Azriena, you can find my work right now on my website at kathara.life. And we will be leaving the links to our website below.
So thanks for joining us. We're so grateful that you're here with us. And on behalf of Galactic Alchemy, we look forward to catch you in a new timeline.